My name is Clara, and for as long as I can remember, my hands have been my truest storytellers. They are not delicate. The nails are short, practical, and often harbor a faint, dark line of grease beneath them, a stubborn ghost of my day's work. The palms are calloused from gripping wrenches and hoisting engine blocks, and the skin carries the faint, metallic scent of diesel and steel, a perfume I've come to associate with purpose. I'm a heavy-duty mechanic. I own a small, thriving shop called Riverbend Heavy Diesel on the industrial outskirts of Cedar Falls, Oregon, a town nestled between the Willamette River and the dense, evergreen foothills of the Cascades. My life is built on tangible things: the satisfying click of a socket wrench, the deep rumble of a perfectly tuned engine, the solid weight of a tool in my hand. I live in a small cottage I bought as a near-derelict shell 5 years ago, slowly bringing it back to life with my own 2 hands, board by board, pipe by pipe. It's quiet here. The loudest sounds are the hoot of a distant train, the rustle of wind through the Douglas firs that guard my property, and the soft crackle of the wood stove in winter. It is a life I have consciously and carefully built for myself. It is also a life my family has never quite understood. My parents, Richard and Helen, are wonderful people in their own way. They live in a pristine colonial on the other side of town, in a neighborhood of manicured lawns and unspoken expectations. My father is a retired architect, a man who appreciates clean lines and flawless blueprints. My mother has made a career of curating beauty, both as an interior designer and as the matriarch of our family. Her world is one of cashmere throws, fine china, and the soft, ambient glow of perfectly placed lighting. And then there is my sister Stella. She is 2 years younger, and she is every bit her name, a star. From birth, she possessed an effortless grace, a radiant smile, and an intuitive understanding of how to navigate the social world. While I was taking apart our father's lawnmower to see how it worked, Stella was taking ballet, her every movement a study in fluid beauty. She went to a prestigious university, studied marketing, and now works for a high-end PR firm in Portland, a life that glitters with gallery openings and client dinners. In my parents' eyes, she is a reflection of all their hopes, a perfect execution of the life they envisioned for their daughters. I am the anomaly, the off-script daughter. My decision to attend a trade school for diesel technology after high school was met not with anger, but with a sort of baffled disappointment. "But Clara, you're so bright," my mother had said, her brow furrowed with genuine confusion. "Couldn't you do something cleaner?" That word, clean, came up often, as did its cousin, respectable. They loved me, I knew that, but they loved me with a persistent, gentle wish that I were someone else entirely. Still, I tried to bridge the gap. I was the one who showed up to fix their sputtering generator during a power outage, the one who quietly repaired the fence that blew down in a windstorm. Every Mother's Day, I brought my mom a pot of her favorite orchids, and for my father's birthday, I always found a rare, out-of-print book on architectural history. But my world of grease and gears remained a foreign, slightly embarrassing country to them. They'd never visited my shop. They'd never asked about the complexities of a Cummins engine rebuild or the certifications I'd worked so hard to earn. But they would forward every single one of Stella's social media posts to the family group chat, adorned with hearts and clapping emojis. I never held it against Stella. She wasn't just living her life, she was living the life they understood. The phone call came on a Tuesday, for days before Christmas Eve. A fine, misty rain was falling, blurring the edges of the world into a soft, gray watercolor. I had just gotten home from a 14-hour day at the shop, a rush job on a fleet of logging trucks that needed to get back into the mountains before the next snowstorm. My hands ached and my back was stiff, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from a day of solid, productive work. I was peeling off my work boots in the mudroom when my phone rang. It was my mother. "Clara, dear, how are you?" Her voice was lighter than usual, a carefully constructed brightness that immediately put me on alert. "I'm good, Mom. Just got in." "Long day," I said, sinking onto the bench. I was just about to start planning my baking schedule. I was thinking of finally tackling Grandma's rum-soaked fruitcake this year. Should I still bring the sweet potato casserole for Christmas Eve? There was a beat of silence, just long enough for the unease in my stomach to crystallize. The rain pattered against the window pane. "Well, darling, that's actually what I was calling about," she began, her tone shifting, becoming more cautious, as if she were testing the ice on a frozen pond. "Things are a little different this year." I waited, my body tensing. "Stella is bringing her new young man home for Christmas. It's become quite serious, it seems." She paused, letting the importance of this announcement settle. "His name is Julian. He's from a very prominent family in Seattle. He went to Stanford, works in finance, he's an investor." "That's great for Stella," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. I knew what was coming. I had felt it coming my whole life, in 1,000 small ways, but I hadn't expected it to arrive so plainly, so directly. "It is," my mother agreed, a note of relief in her voice, as if my simple affirmation had cleared the way. "And Stella, well, she wants everything to be just perfect. You understand. First impressions are so important." She hesitated, and then the gentle blade slipped in. She was a little concerned that your presence might be a bit jarring for him. Jarring. The word hung in the air between us. Not my personality, not my humor, not my love for them. My presence. My calloused hands. My flannel shirts and worn-in Carhartts. The lingering scent of the shop that no amount of soap could ever fully scrub away. "She just wants to present a certain image, Clara," my mother added quickly, the words tumbling out now. "A unified front. Polished. You understand, don't you, dear?" I thought of the gifts I'd already wrapped and placed under my small, fragrant fir tree. For my father, a vintage, leather-bound drafting set I'd sourced from an antique dealer in England, its brass instruments cool and heavy. For my mother, a delicate, hand-dyed silk shawl from a local artist she admired. For Stella, a first-edition copy of her favorite childhood book, which I'd spent months hunting for. These were pieces of me, thoughtful and real. But they weren't polished enough. I wasn't polished enough. I could have argued. I could have reminded her of the time I'd co-signed a loan for Stella to get her first apartment in Portland when her entry-level salary wasn't enough, a detail we never spoke of again. I could have cried. But I was too tired, and the hurt was too old, too familiar. It was a well-worn coat, and I knew its shape by heart. So I closed my eyes, took a breath that tasted of rain and exhaustion, and gave her the only answer she was prepared to hear. "I understand, Mom." "Oh, thank you, darling," she breathed, the relief in her voice so profound it was almost a wound in itself. "I knew you would. We'll celebrate with you properly after the holidays. Just the four of us." After I hung up, I stood in my mudroom for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. The floorboards creaked. A draft whispered from beneath the back door, a reminder of a weather stripping project I hadn't gotten to yet. I walked into the living room and looked at the gifts under the tree, their cheerful paper suddenly looking naive and out of place. I didn't move them. I simply sat down in my worn armchair, the one I'd reupholstered myself, and watched the gray afternoon fade into a deep, starless night. Christmas Eve dawned cold and clear. A layer of frost silvered the grass and turned the puddles in my gravel driveway into sheets of ice. The world outside was crisp and silent. Inside, my little cottage was even quieter. There was no boisterous shouting at a football game on TV, no scent of my mother's roast beef, no clatter of silverware as the table was set. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock I had painstakingly restored. I stayed in bed late, tracing the patterns of frost on the window pane with my finger. Around 10, I finally got up, pulled on a thick woolen sweater, and made myself breakfast, 2 scrambled eggs and a piece of sourdough toast, eaten while standing at the kitchen counter. The silk shawl in its elegant gift box seemed to watch me from the table. The silence began to feel heavy, suffocating. I needed to move, to do something useful. I needed to use my hands. Then I remembered the voicemail from 2 days prior. It was from Mrs. Gable, a retired librarian who lived a few miles down the road in a rambling old farmhouse. I'd helped her a few times, once with a leaky roof and another time with her ancient, temperamental pickup truck. Her message said her furnace had gone out. I packed my toolbox, my movements feeling purposeful for the first time all day. Mrs. Gable's house was a cozy clutter of books, potted plants, and sleeping cats. She answered the door wrapped in 3 layers of sweaters, her cheeks pink from the cold. Her face, etched with the fine lines of a life well lived, lit up when she saw me. "Clara." "Oh, you're a Christmas miracle," she said, her voice raspy but warm. "I didn't really expect you'd come today." "It's no trouble, Mrs. Gable," I said, stepping inside. "Better than sitting at home talking to the walls." She gave me a look so full of gentle understanding that it made my throat tighten. "Well, the coffee is fresh. Help yourself." The furnace was an old oil-burning beast, but its mechanics were straightforward. It took me less than an hour to diagnose the clogged nozzle and replace it. As I worked, Mrs. Gable sat in a nearby chair, reading poetry aloud to me from a worn anthology, her voice a soothing murmur against the clink and scrape of my tools. When the furnace finally roared to life, she clapped her hands softly. I stayed for a while longer, sipping coffee while she told me stories about her late husband, a history professor who had apparently been a terrible cook but an excellent dancer. Before I left, she pressed a heavy, foil-wrapped package into my hands. "It's a slice of my apple crumble pie," she said. "In case you need a reminder of what a real welcome feels like." Driving home as dusk settled, I took the long way, my route taking me past my parents' street. The house was blazing with light, a perfect diorama of holiday cheer. Through the large picture window, I could see the silhouettes of people mingling, wine glasses in hand, their laughter a faint, imagined music. In the center of it all was the magnificent Christmas tree, its lights twinkling. It was a beautiful picture. It just wasn't my picture. I didn't slow down. Back at my cottage, I built a fire in the wood stove. I curled up in my armchair with Mrs. Gable's pie. It wasn't my grandmother's fruitcake, and it wasn't accompanied by the boisterous energy of a family gathering. But it was warm, sweet, and given with simple kindness. It was enough. For the first time that day, the silence in my house didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like peace. For the first time in a long, long time, I had no one to please, no image to uphold, no part to play. And in that quiet solitude, I didn't feel lonely. I felt, strangely and wonderfully, free. This freedom was not an accident. It was something I had been quietly building for a decade, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. People saw the grease on my hands and the steel-toed boots and assumed that was the entire story. But the most complex machine I'd ever built wasn't an engine, it was my life. The seed was planted when I was 21, during my first year working at a large commercial freight depot. I was living in a tiny apartment, barely making ends meet, and I felt a gnawing anxiety that this was it, a life of just getting by. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through a box of my grandfather's old belongings that my parents had given me, I found a book tucked at the bottom. It was a worn paperback from the 1970s called The Wealthy Barber. I'd never heard of it. Out of boredom, I started to read. It wasn't a book about getting rich quick. It was a simple, elegant story about financial discipline, about paying yourself first, about the quiet, inexorable power of compound interest. A switch flipped in my brain. It was like understanding the schematic of a complex system for the first time. It was a language of logic and patience, a language I understood. I read 5 more books on personal finance that I checked out from the Cedar Falls Public Library. At 22, I opened my first investment account with just $500, money I'd saved by working overtime shifts. I set up an automatic transfer of $50 a week into a low-cost index fund. It felt like a ridiculously small amount, but the book had taught me that starting was more important than the amount. The habit became my anchor. I started waking up at 5 a.m., not to an alarm, but to an inner drive. I'd make a pot of strong coffee and spend an hour reading financial news and market analysis before heading to the shop. I learned to read a company's balance sheet with the same focused attention I gave a diesel engine's diagnostic report. I picked up side jobs repairing farm equipment on weekends, welding for a local metal sculptor. Every extra dollar didn't go to new clothes or fancy dinners, it went into my portfolio. It became a quiet, private game, a way of claiming a stake in a world that seemed to have no place for me. When I was 27, I bought the derelict cottage on 3 acres of overgrown land. The bank was hesitant to give me a mortgage, but my meticulous financial records and the size of my down payment, saved and invested over 6 years, convinced them. The house was a disaster, a leaking roof, crumbling plaster, and wiring that was a fire hazard. But I saw the good bones beneath the decay. For 5 years, I poured my life into that house and my portfolio. I learned to plumb, to wire, to lay flooring, to plaster walls. Every skill I learned, every repair I did myself, was thousands of dollars saved on labor, money that went straight into my investments. I never talked about it. Not with my parents, not with Stella, not even with my closest friend, Maya. It wasn't a shameful secret. It was a sacred one. It was the one part of my life that was entirely mine, unburdened by my family's judgment or expectations. My wealth was not about buying things. It was about buying freedom. The freedom to live life on my own terms. As of my last quarterly statement, my investment portfolio had reached a value of just over $1.2 million. The number felt abstract, unreal. I still drove my 10-year-old Ford pickup with 180,000 miles on the clock. I still bought my work clothes from the discount rack at the supply store. I still packed my own lunch every day. What I had built was silent, invisible, and solid as bedrock. I sometimes wondered if I kept it secret out of pride, or if it was a form of protection. If they didn't respect me when I was just Clara the mechanic, then they didn't deserve to know Clara the investor. Let them think I was the one who struggled. They had never met the woman I had built myself to be. It was the day after New Year's. The holiday cheer had evaporated, leaving behind the quiet, gray reality of January in Oregon. I was in my workshop, a large, heated space I had built next to the cottage, deep in concentration. I was restoring a vintage 1968 Triumph motorcycle, my personal project. The chrome gleamed under the shop lights, and the scent of oil and metal polish filled the air. I was meticulously rejetting the carburetors when I heard the sound of a car crunching slowly up my long gravel driveway. I glanced out the window and my heart dropped. It was my father's slate gray Audi. A moment later, 2 car doors opened and closed. I wiped my hands on a red rag, my stomach twisting into a knot. I stepped out of the workshop into the crisp, cold air and waited. There they stood, looking utterly out of place against the backdrop of my rustic cottage and muddy yard. My father, Richard, looking uncomfortable in his tailored wool overcoat. My mother, Helen, clutching a beautifully wrapped tin of what I assumed were her famous lemon poppy seed muffins as if it were a shield, and Stella. Stella looked like she'd been crying. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red-rimmed and furious. "Clara," my mother called out, her voice straining for a cheerful tone that shattered against the tense silence. "We were in the area and thought we'd pop by. See how you are." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe of my workshop. It was my space, my ground. "You were in the area?" "Mom, I live 15 miles from town. And you're here a week after you uninvited me from Christmas." Stella strode forward, her expensive leather boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt. "You should have told us, Clara." Her voice was a low, shaking accusation. I blinked, genuinely confused. "Told you what?" "That Julian used to work for you." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Julian. The Stanford-educated investor. Her Julian. I searched my memory, and an image surfaced. A lanky, unsure kid of about 19, with glasses and a desperate need for a summer job. He'd worked for me about 6 years ago, for 2 summers, at my old job at the freight depot. He'd been a shop assistant, gopher, parts cleaner, general helping hand. His name was Julian Croft. "I didn't know it was the same Julian until last night," Stella continued, her voice rising. "We were at dinner with some of his colleagues. One of them made a joke about dirty jobs, and Julian, he laughed. He said, 'You want to talk about a dirty job? You should have seen me my first summer working for Clara. She could rebuild a diesel engine with her eyes closed. Taught me everything I know about work ethic.'" My chest felt tight. "He told them everything," she said, her arms now crossed defensively. "About how you took him under your wing when he was a clueless kid. How you taught him how to manage his money, how you sat with him after hours and explained the basics of investing. How you convinced the manager not to fire him after he accidentally backed a forklift into a loading dock. He said he wouldn't have had the discipline to get through his finance degree without the lessons he learned in your garage. My mother's face was ashen. My father was staring intently at a loose piece of gravel near his shoe. Then Stella delivered the final, devastating blow. Her voice trembled, a mixture of rage and humiliation. He told them about your portfolio. He said you were the one who inspired him to take investing seriously. He told them, Stella's sister is probably a millionaire by now, and she built it all herself, one busted knuckle at a time. He said it with admiration, Clara. In front of everyone. And you let me stand there, looking like a fool who was ashamed of her own sister. The silence that followed was immense. The only sound was the distant caw of a crow. No, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. I didn't. My mother took a hesitant step forward. Darling, we had no idea. I looked from her face to Stella's. Would it have mattered? If he hadn't said anything, would my invitation to Christmas have magically reappeared? The silence was my answer. My father cleared his throat, the sound loud in the still air. It's not about the money, Clara. A short, bitter laugh escaped me. Isn't it? Stella's eyes, which I now saw were shimmering with shame, not sadness, locked onto mine. You made me look like an idiot. That was the heart of it. Not the fractured relationship, not the years of quiet dismissal, but her own public image. I didn't make you do anything, Stella, I said, my voice even. You chose to be ashamed of me long before Julian ever entered the picture. My mother, sensing a complete loss of control, thrust the tin of muffins forward. We came here to apologize, Clara. And to talk. She glanced nervously at Stella. Julian is starting a new venture. A tech company focused on logistics and fleet management. He thinks you two should connect. That with his financial acumen and your industry knowledge, you could build something incredible together. And there it was. The pivot. The real reason for their pilgrimage. Not remorse. Not love. Opportunity. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. I stepped back, over the threshold and into the sanctuary of my workshop. The beautiful, half-finished Triumph stood behind me, a testament to what I built for love, not for profit. You came to apologize, I said, my voice resonating in the large space. But you brought a business proposal. Stella's face hardened, her PR composure returning. It's called creating an opportunity, Clara. Something you, of all people, should understand. Oh, I do, I said softly. I understand it so well. That's why I learned to create my own. I turned, picked up a clean rag, and began polishing a piece of chrome, my back to them. I didn't have to ask them to leave. After a moment of heavy silence, I heard the crunch of gravel as they walked back to the car, the soft thud of the doors closing, and the sound of the engine fading down the long driveway, leaving me alone in the quiet, humming piece of my own world. That night, sleep was elusive. The confrontation played over and over in my mind, a film reel of pained faces and hollow words. The tin of my mother's muffins sat on my kitchen counter, a perfect, untouched symbol of their too little too late offering. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Stella. I almost didn't answer, but a deeper, calmer part of me knew this conversation was necessary. Hey, she said. Her voice was small, stripped of its usual confidence. Look, the other day was a complete disaster. I'm sorry. I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the space between us. I talked to Julian again, she continued. He really does respect you, Clara. He thinks this business idea has huge potential, especially with you as a partner. Because of my money, I stated. It wasn't a question. Because of your experience, she corrected, a little too quickly. And yes, fine, the capital is a big part of it. But he sees your value. He sees what we failed to. There was a pause, and for the first time, I heard a crack of genuine regret in her voice. I know we haven't been close. But I thought, maybe this could be a chance. To build something together. As sisters. A familiar ache bloomed in my chest. For so many years, this was all I had wanted, for her to see me. Not the grease-stained caricature, but the competent, dedicated woman I was. And here it was, an invitation. a seat at the table. But the invitation was written on the back of a stock certificate. Stella, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Do you have any idea what my average day looks like? She hesitated. You fix trucks. I diagnose complex CAN-bus electrical failures on vehicles that cost more than my house. I recalibrate engine control modules to meet federal emission standards. I manage payroll and inventory for a business with 7 employees. I mentor apprentices. And yes, sometimes, I still get on my back on a cold concrete floor to swap out a transmission because a job needs to be done right. Silence. I've built a life, Stella, I went on. Not just a portfolio. A life I'm proud of. I know, she whispered. That's why this is such a great opportunity. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at my yard, at the bare branches of the apple trees I'd planted. If Julian had never mentioned my finances, would I have been welcome at your Christmas dinner? Her answer was a ghost of a word, heavy with shame. No. So, let me be clear, I said, my voice gaining a quiet strength I didn't know I possessed. I am not interested in purchasing my family's approval. A relationship with me can't be a business transaction. If you ever want to build something real with me, it will have to start with you showing up with nothing but time and a willingness to learn who I actually am. Clara, don't be so proud, she said, a flash of her old frustration returning. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. This isn't pride, Stella, I replied softly. It's self-respect. I ended the call, my hands steady. I stood in the stillness of my kitchen, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was just finished. Finished with the performance, finished with the yearning. And in its place, a profound sense of peace began to take root. A week later, my parents came back. Alone this time. There was no pretense of being in the area. They knocked on my front door, a sound both timid and determined. I opened it, wiping my hands on a towel. My mother's eyes were shadowed. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him. Can we come in, Clara? My father asked, his voice low. I stepped aside and let them into my home. We sat in the living room, the room I had gutted and rebuilt with my own hands. The silk shawl I had bought for my mother was still in its box on the mantelpiece. Her eyes flickered to it, and then away. We made a terrible mistake, my mother began, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I said simply. You did. We were wrong, my father added. It was wrong to exclude you. We never meant to hurt you. I looked at him, at this man who had taught me the basics of how a combustion engine works when I was a curious child, before the world told him it wasn't a respectable interest for a girl. Didn't you? Or did you just not expect me to have a boundary you couldn't cross? They both looked down, their silence a confession. I want you to know, I said, leaning forward slightly, I'm not ashamed of my life. I love my work. I love this house. The only thing I have ever been ashamed of is how long I let your disappointment make me feel small. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We were just trying to protect Stella's big moment. We didn't think. But you erased mine, I said, my voice unwavering. And I have spent my entire life trying to be enough for you. I'm done. I held up a hand as they both started to speak. I'm not cutting you out. But I am done trying to earn my place. The performance is over. My father let out a long, slow breath. What happens now then? I stood up and walked to the front door, opening it to the gray January afternoon. What happens now, I said, turning to face them, is that you leave. And you decide. You decide if you can love the daughter you have, not the one you wish you had. The door to my life won't be locked. But from now on, you'll have to knock and you'll have to be invited in. And you'll only be invited in if you come seeking me, Clara, not my balance sheet. They stood, hesitating in the middle of my living room. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, I didn't fill the silence. I let it stretch, let it do its work. Finally, with a shared look of defeat and something fragile that might one day become understanding, they walked out the door. I closed it gently behind them, the click of the latch sounding less like an ending and more like a beginning. It has been nearly a year. The silence from my parents has been profound, broken only by a generic birthday card signed by both of them. Stella called a few months ago to say that Julian's startup had secured funding, but that he'd done it without her. His admiration for my work ethic, it turned out, had not extended to her lack of it. She was looking for a new job. I wished her well, and I meant it. My life, in the meantime, has quietly blossomed. Word got around, as it does in a small town. A young woman from the trade program at the local community college reached out, asking if I would mentor her. I said yes. I started hosting a free monthly Know Your Car workshop for women in my shop. It's always packed. I found a community not based on blood or obligation, but on shared passions and mutual respect. This evening, as the autumn sun casts long shadows across my yard, my friend Maya pulls up in her dusty Subaru. She brings 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a bag of maple bars from the good bakery in town. Saving the world, one busted transmission at a time, she teases, settling into the Adirondack chair I built last spring. Something like that, I smile, leaning back and taking a sip of coffee. We sit in comfortable silence, watching the leaves drift down from the maple tree I planted my first year here. Hear from them, she asks gently. No, I say, without a trace of bitterness. I don't think I will. Not in the way that matters. Their loss, she says simply. I know. I look at her, my friend who has seen me at my grimiest and never once saw me as less. You know, for the longest time, I felt like my life was a puzzle with a missing piece. I thought the piece was their approval. I look out at the world I have built, the sturdy cottage, the thriving business, the garden preparing for its winter sleep. I was wrong. The missing piece wasn't a piece at all. It was the belief that I was already whole. Maya smiles, a warm, genuine smile that reaches her eyes. That's the most philosophical thing I've ever heard you say. Don't get used to it, I laugh. Tomorrow I'll be back focusing at a seized bolt. But as the first stars begin to prick the deep violet sky, I know she's right. I am no longer trying to fix a broken part in a machine that was never designed for me. I was the machine all along. And I am finally running perfectly.